Hello and welcome to CRTV 131 Contemporary American Cinema, Class 7. And we've made it this far through the semester, mostly all in class, but now we are transitioning to online. I think you'll find that this method very closely replicates the classroom experience. At least I hope it does for you. So I'm going to be able to do a voiceover narration of my usual PowerPoint slides, which you would normally see in class. And then, instead of me being able to show you lots of film clips from online and from my DVD collection, you are going to get a separate email at first, and then I hope I will be putting them in Canvas so that you can find them there. But in any event, you will have lots of URLs linking to scenes from all the films that we discuss in YouTube. So that's an important part of the class, is watching the scenes from the film. So please do that as well. Don't just go through the PowerPoint slides. And so this is like a regular lecture, so don't forget to take notes, and off we go. Today we're going to start with, we're working our way into the 70s and 80s, and we're going to start with Woody Allen. He's done 50 films, a few more, since 1969. He started as a very young writer for television, live TV, way back in the 1950s, Sid Caesar's classic show back in the 1950s. He got into stand-up comedy and started writing movies, and then, like a lot of writers, decided that he could probably do a better job directing the movies than the people that were directing. They were good directors, but a lot of writers like to direct their own movies. And on top of that, Woody was, since he started in stand-up, was a performer in most of his movies up until maybe 10 years ago or so. Now he's in his 80s, but he was starring in most of his movies all the way until about 10 years ago or so. And he's very well regarded in Hollywood. 24 Oscar nominations for directing, writing, more than anybody else, as far as I can tell. There are probably some that are getting up there, like Spielberg and so on. 17 actors have gotten Oscar nominations, and most actors like to work with nominations. It's nice to win, but a lot of actors would love to work with directors who can pull in those nominations. And Woody's a pretty good scriptwriter. He's won 3 Oscars for scriptwriting, so pretty good place for him. And we're going to start with Annie Hall from 1977, and this movie won the best. Would have had the big 5. That's Diane Keaton there on the left, and that's sort of a classic look. At least it was back in the 70s. Diane put that together more or less on her own, with sort of the vaguely male look with slacks and the tie and the vest and so on. And that was kind of a thing for young ladies in the 1970s. And that happens a lot in movies. People see fashions and things that they like in the movies. This goes all the way back to the teens and 20s and 30s and so on. And so this was a bit of a fashion thing for people in the 1970s. So this is a pretty groundbreaking film. It's almost an experimental film, and the clips that I have for you are going to reference most of this. We're going to see a little bit of breaking the fourth wall. We're going to actually, the clips aren't going to be able to reference the nonlinearness of the film. Nonlinear meaning that it jumps around from sort of the present to the past and back and forth not in a straight line, but jumping around a little bit. We're going to see in this scene right here, actually, thought subtitles. So we're actually going to see what they're really thinking, subtitled into the screen or above them on the screen there. And also we're going to see them as animated characters. There are just so many weird things that they threw into this movie. It really is almost an experimental movie. There are split screens, and the characters on one scene actually talking to the characters on the other side of the split screen. Woody is going to appear as an adult with his young self in a flashback in grade school, talking to his teacher. He's going to give voiceover. That's important. We've talked about voiceover quite a bit. There's another scene where actors leave their bodies and appear sort of as ghosts. They're sort of going through the motions. They're in the bedroom, and the thrill has gone out of their relationship, and they sort of leave their bodies, and they're sort of going through the motions. So really, there's a lot of stuff going on. This is 1977. This is the year that Star Wars, the very first Star Wars movie, was nominated for the Oscar. Some other pretty good movies too, Close Encounters of the Third Kind in the 1970s. And this one is the one that won. This is the film that beat Star Wars. And I don't think there are that many people in Hollywood that think that it was a big mistake. It holds up pretty well. It was more really in keeping in time of the new cinema of the 1970s. Star Wars is a little bit old-fashioned, and it's sort of meant to be old-fashioned, and we'll discuss a little bit of that coming up, I think. But Annie Hall, being kind of experimental as it really was keeping in times with the 1970s. So Woody had a pretty good career, these 50, 60 years or so. These are some of the better films that he has done. Like I say, there's an awful lot of movies, and you can sort of search around and find the ones that you might like. Earlier in his career, way back when he was doing movies like Sleeper and Bananas and Take the Money and Run and so on, they were a lot more almost like silent comedies, more physical comedy, physical humor, things like that. And then Annie Hall was sort of a transition film for him, and so it was still a comedy for sure, and he's doing those odd things like breaking the fourth wall and being animated and that sort of thing. But it's a lot more reality based. It's not quite as silly and slapsticky as some of those earlier movies. But Sleeper's a really fun movie. You might check that out on YouTube and maybe look at the trailer and things like that. But this is sort of the new era of Woody. He might be, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 movies in by the time he does Annie Hall. Manhattan, considered a real classic, one of his best. It's done in black and white. There are a number of directors that we'll talk in class that have worked in black and white. Tim Burton did stop motion Tim Burton he's done stop motion. He did stop motion in black and white, sorry. And he did Ed Wood in black and white. So he has worked in black and white. Francis Coppola has worked in black and white. Steven Spielberg has worked in black and white. And we will talk about that. And I'll have a slide for you on the directors that have taken a chance and done a black and white film. In the meantime, you might check out some of these films from Woody. And don't forget to check out the scenes from the URLs that I have given you. This is a little bit of a, just sort of like an ad, really. There's a really good podcast out there called YouMustRememberThis.com, or You Must Remember This, and you can find it there or at Apple or whatever, and it is about the very first 100 Years of Hollywood as a podcast, so you can listen to it, walking around or driving around. The series that she does, her name's Karina Longworth. There it is, Karina Longworth. And she's written a couple of books, and it's a fantastic podcast. So I just wanted to put that out for you, something to maybe check out. And like it says, maybe some insight into Tarantino's new Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She does I think an 8 or 9 part series on Charles Manson's Hollywood. So anyway, fun podcast. You might think about that. All right, back to class. And in the 1970s, we have Heaven's Gate. And this movie is going to, it's going to be kind of notorious. It costs an awful lot of money for the movie, an awful lot. And the press is going to start reporting on the cost of the movie more than just making the movie. And that had been around for a while. They talked about the high cost of Cleopatra back in the early 60s and some other movies. But now it's going to be kind of a thing with the press and the box office. And we see that even echoing today with the weekend box office reported on most of our news feeds, usually on Sunday afternoon. So Cimino had won an armful of Oscars for his previous film, The Deer Hunter. Best Picture, Screenplay, Best Director, music, editing, cinematography, all sorts of Oscars and everything. And so the studio, very happy, of course, said, fantastic, Michael, go out there and make us another brilliant art masterpiece. And, do whatever you want to do, more or less, and make us another wonderful movie, right? You are a genius and you can do it. So we really get this example of an out-of-control auteur director, and because of the cost overruns and so on, the studio decides to start taking back control of the filmmaking process. And there are a number of directors who went just a little overboard, maybe more than a little overboard. And yet it is a business in Hollywood, and money is a big part of that. And making big, expensive movies is fine. We have lots of big, expensive movies today. All the Avatar movies, and the Marvel movies, and the James Bond movies are very expensive, but they all make money. That's important. They all make money. So Hollywood is not against big budgets. They're against losing money. They like a big roll of the dice. And so you will see the trailer for the film. It's pretty good representation of the film, and you're always encouraged to go digging around and finding other scenes from the film. It's about a real event that happened in the Wild West of, I believe it was Wyoming, in the 1870s. The Johnson County War, it was called sometimes. And basically there is a clash of cultures between the people, the ranchers, who had been there for quite a while, and the immigrants, who were mostly going to be farmers. And the ranchers liked the idea that their cattle could roam all over the range, and the farmers didn't like the idea of the cattle roaming over their crops and things like that. So you get that for sure, but the clash of the cultures is the immigrants are the new people. Now, these immigrants, they are white, right? They are Caucasians. They are Poles and Swedes and Russians. Okay, they're still white Christians. And I have said this with other instances in these classes. People don't need much of an excuse to be racist. It really, skin color, sure, race, religion, all that. But people can be racist against fellow white Christians too. And that's very sad, of course, very sad. But it really doesn't take a lot of difference, I don't think. It doesn't take a lot of difference to be racist. And here it was just the people that were already there and the new people. So it seems to me that this movie would play very interestingly today. with the problems that we're having with immigration and racism and so on. I'd be interested if they wanted to re-release it or something like that. So if you choose to watch it, that's certainly a big theme of the movie. So part of the reason it went so far over budget was Cimino decided that he wanted this beautiful look of right around sunset. And the lighting is very, very nice for a lot of filmmakers. Right around sunset, they call it magic hour. And you get this beautiful color in the sky, and people photographed quite nicely. And so Cimino was waiting most of the day to shoot during magic hour. So that's going to lengthen your location shooting by quite a bit. He wanted really a lot of authenticity, and mostly you can't tell what's authentic and real on the screen. If it looks like a cowboy hat or cowboy boots or whatever, or a train, then usually it's fine. But he wanted the right kind of Stetson hats and the right kind of boots that they had back in the 1870s, and narrow gauge railways and printing presses and all sorts of stuff that you really don't see on the screen. And he really wanted it for his film. And he wanted some scenes from when the protagonists were in college. So they had to go all the way over to England to shoot at Oxford or Cambridge for some nice 1870s or 1860s college graduation, all sorts of things that really drove the cost of the movie up by quite a bit. So he's shooting way up, I think, in Montana, but it's pretty far away from Hollywood, so it took a long time for oversight of the producers to, fly into somewhere and fly in somewhere else, and then get into a Jeep or something and drive all the way out to the set. So it's not like they were just shooting in Hollywood and they could keep track on him and his cost overruns. And there is a term in psychology and in economics that relates to throwing good money after bad money. And oh gosh, we've already spent, in today's dollars, I'm adjusting for inflation, we've already spent $150 million on this movie, and now Cimino's saying, well, it's just for another $25 or $30 million, it's going to be really a great movie. And then the studio's saying, well, we're already in for this much, we might as well put a little bit more in. And then, oh, it's another 15 million. I got to get this scene in England. And so the studio is thinking, well, we've already sunk this much money into the movie. Let's put a little bit more in, and we'll have this movie. And psychologists and economists say that this is really a bad idea. You really should pull the plug. You shouldn't put throw good money after bad money, as they say. But it just, in our gut, it just doesn't seem like it's the right thing to do. I've already spent this money on this house or on this whatever, on this, and I'll just put a little bit more money into it, and then everything will be fine. And usually it's not. Anyway, Cimino got the studio to finish the film and all the money and all that. And you'll see in the trailer, it's a gorgeous looking movie, but there's a lot of talk. It's like close to 3 hours. And yeah, there's some nice battles and things, but there's an awful lot of talk. And it really lost a lot of money at the box office. And so the takeaway, again, here we are in italics. I've told you that throughout this semester. Italics is kind of the key takeaways on a lot of these slides. And so the idea of losing lots of money and the press informing the public about the cost of the movie. Normally, the press wouldn't talk that much about that. But starting in 1980s or thereabouts, cost became a big part. And so in the 1970s, we have a lot of big directors. Look at these directors. Martin Scorsese. Okay, William Friedkin did The Exorcist. Okay, Steven Spielberg, Jaws, and all sorts of wonderful movies up to that point. Francis Coppola with Godfather and Apocalypse Now. Robert Altman with MASH, and Peter Bogdanovich and they all were highly regarded, award-winning directors. This, by the way, is Steven Spielberg. There he is, young Steven Spielberg, and they're shooting a scene with models for 1941. Okay, and I like 1941. It's a good movie. It's a comedy. Spielberg says he would not do any more comedies, and I don't think he's ever done really a comedy since then. But all these directors, for some reason, have these ideas, these big crazy ideas, and with big budgets. And there's Scorsese. He wants to do New York, New York, kind of a musical, and with Robert De Niro. So not a good match. Liza Minnelli, sure, but Robert De Niro in a musical, probably not a good idea. William Friedkin wants to do his follow-up to The Exorcist. Okay, very scary movie, The Exorcist, and Sorcerer. But what do you think Sorcerer is about? Truck drivers. Okay, yes, truck drivers. That's the name of the truck. The truck has the name Sorcerer. So the public is going to be kind of fooled, I guess, not on purpose, but the public's going to be fooled. It's based on a French film that's pretty good called Wages of Fear, probably a better title. And it's a big budget movie, and the truck drivers are tasked with driving dynamite over a mountain pass in South America, somewhere in the Andes. So we get these rope bridges and things like that. And you know, it's a pretty good movie, but I think the public was kind of thinking Sorcerer from the director of The Exorcist. And so, big flop there. Steven Spielberg, as I said, he's doing a movie about the days following the bombing at Pearl Harbor, so December 8, 9, 10, 11 in 1941, and it's a comedy, and it has to be a big, big comedy, because Spielberg, he's the hot director, Jaws and all that, and he and Close Encounters by that time, and he thinks, okay, if a can of paint on somebody's head is funny, how about a tank drives through a paint warehouse or factory? Okay, so something simple and small, like a silent movie, a Chaplin movie with a can of paint falling on somebody's head. Now Spielberg's deciding to make it big, big, big. And all the hot people from 1940, from the 1970s were in the film from Saturday Night Live. So we get John Belushi and a lot of people like that, the hot young people. Francis Coppola, One from the Heart, a musical, okay, another musical, Robert Altman, Popeye, yes, you guessed it, also a musical. And who's your first thought of somebody starring in a musical? Probably not Robin Williams. Okay, Robin Williams as Popeye in the live action Popeye. And wow, you have to see it to believe it. And they decided they had to build a whole giant village, sort of a fishing village where Popeye's from, and that's all the way over in Europe on Malta. So that costs a ton of money. You'd think they could do a nice, simple Popeye movie. Robin Williams sounds like pretty good casting to me, but no. And Peter Bogdanovich does a musical, yes, a musical, with his girlfriend, Sybil Shepherd, who isn't really much of a singer. So unfortunately, a lot of directors made box office bombs. A lot of directors in the 70s, frankly, were doing too many drugs. And this is fairly well documented in books. There's a pretty good book about all this called Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, how the rock and roll generation changed Hollywood, saved Hollywood, something like that. And so, yeah, they've all got coke habits. They think they can rule the world. A lot of them divorce or separate from their first wives. They get trophy wives, younger, prettier model type women, and so on, right? Not every single one of them, but a bunch of them did. And frankly, young men with giant amounts of money, you're just asking for trouble. Okay, I'm glad, I guess, I didn't have tens of millions of dollars when I was like 19. Who knows how stupid I would have been with it? But all you have to do is look to the music industry, look to sports, young men with giant recording contracts or sports contracts and buying big, stupid, goofy houses and all sorts of things like that, and probably doing drugs and partying and all that. So it's just a recipe for disaster. And these guys were all young, and they were all told, "You are God's gift to moviedom," and it all went to their heads. So we get this period of the big box office bombs. Now we're going to go back a little bit with Spielberg. Okay, this is from the 1980s. We're going to go back a little bit with Spielberg to when he really had his big hit, Jaws, from 1975. It's based on a book, and that's important because a lot of movies are based on books, a lot of really good movies. If you think about it, from The Lord of the Rings, the first batch of James Bond movies, Twilight, Hunger Games, Harry Potter, so many big movie franchises are based on books. And so the studio thought, we have a built-in audience. That's generally the thinking. You have a built-in audience, and all the people that read the book are going to want to see the movie. So Steven Spielberg had only made one other movie before this. He had a very interesting start to his career. He couldn't get into USC where he wanted to go, and he got into Cal State Long Beach. And at some point, he had an internship at Universal Studios in Hollywood. I don't know if it's through the college or not, but he had an internship. And the story that he tells is that when the internship was over, he just kept going back to the studio, right? He just kept going back. The guards at the gate knew him, I guess. And he sort of wormed his way in and helping directors out and doing odd things and watching. And eventually he got a chance to direct some television shows and some bigger type shows, what they used to call made-for-movie shows, and which would be like a 90-minute standalone sort of a mini movie. So he got a chance to direct, and there we go, Trouble with the Shark. Okay, Big Trouble with the Mechanical Shark. Here's the mechanical shark. I love that picture. It was constructed in a pool in California in fresh water. Apparently the salt water caused problems, but the shark, it just didn't work. Most of the time it just didn't work, and it would freeze up or whatever. And there are stories of the actors on the set, you know, sitting around playing cards, whatever, and then the walkie-talkies would all go, you know, the shark is working, everybody to the set. Spielberg named the shark after his lawyer, Bruce, so sometimes you might see a reference to Bruce the shark. And so he said his own words, it looked like a big white turd. And so he and his editor, Verna Fields, and by the way, as a side note, a lot of the really best editors in Hollywood have been and are female. And women have had a real tough go of it getting into directing, for sure. We all know about that. It's very hard there. And also cinematography. It's really a boys' club when it comes to cinematography and directing, but they have made really great inroads and contributions in editing. And I'm not sure why that is, but Verna Fields and Scorsese has used a female editor for many years, and a lot of the best editors are women. So, and she did a great job on this movie by cutting the shark out of the movie. Right? Practically cutting the shark out of the movie. Look at that. 2 minutes and 22 seconds. I timed it myself. Okay, I timed it myself. I've been telling my students for years that they just about cut the shark out of the movie, and I thought maybe I better get some numbers on that. So I pulled out my DVD and went through all the scenes, and really, it's as good as it is because there's just fractions of a second up there. And it was edited on film, and film is 24 frames per second. Now it's digital, and they have ways of sort of converting, that 24 frames. But there would be 6 frames, 8 frames, 10 frames, right, of a second. And when you see little bits of the shark, then you fill in a lot of the detail in your imagination, right? Our imaginations are fantastic. That's why when we're little kids, something's under the bed or something's in the closet. It's all in our mind, and so that's what happened in this film. The audience got to really fill in all of the details and all of the gaps for the shark. So the 2 scenes that I usually show in class, and I have the links to them, the 2 scenes, the very first attack, there's no shark. Okay, there's no shark at all. We see a young girl swimming, like a midnight swim during a party, and we see the camera's point of view, right? So we're basically seeing through the shark's eyes. So the camera, in essence, becomes the shark. And after the first attack, we hear the wonderful John Williams score. Dun, 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 dun. We hear that wonderful John Williams music, and we are seeing through the shark's eyes, and then we cut to above the surface of the water, and the girl gasps, and she gets pulled under the water, and she's screaming, and all that. We never see a shark. And it is scary as can be. And the second attack, a little bit longer. I love showing it to class, and it really shows off Spielberg's genius, really, for filmmaking. And so you got to watch that scene. It's a fantastic scene. We're going to meet the 2 victims, Pippet the dog and Alex the boy, cute little boy. And Spielberg's going to do the whole scene's not very long at all. It's just a couple of minutes, but it's just full of wonderful filmmaking technique. We are introduced to the 2 victims. He sprinkles lots of yellow all through the scene. It's a beach scene, so there's lots of yellow, blankets and coolers and hats and all that. And yellow is kind of an active color. It's kind of an excitable color, and theorists talk about how yellow is really very active like this. So there's lots of yellow sprinkled around. We're going to see the scene from pretty low. Spielberg is going to keep placing the camera on the tripod, but very low in the sand and in the water. So those of us in the audience are kind of sitting there with our feet in the sand or our feet in the water. He doesn't give us high angle bird's eye view shots. So we're kind of in that scene too. And he keeps these shots very tight and so on. He's going to give us a false alarm, okay, a scream. It's a false alarm. And we're going to see a lot of the scene through Chief Brody's eyes. He's the new sheriff to town, police sheriff there, or police captain, I'm not sure, sheriff, police captain. And he doesn't really like the water. And this is an island community in on the East Coast. And we're going after the first attack, and he's very nervous with lots of people on the beach, and he's sitting in his beach chair, and things keep blocking his view, which means things keep blocking our view too. People keep walking across his field of view. It looks like somebody, it's all blurry because they're too close to the camera, but it looks like somebody's wearing like a yellow raincoat in 2 or 3 times. And again, there's the yellow, and it's sort of blocking our view, and what we can't see is very scary, right? What's under the bed, that sort of thing. We can't see it, so it makes it kind of scary. And here, even in broad daylight, Spielberg's sort of blocking our view. We can't quite tell what's going on. We get the jump scare, the scream, false alarm. And then he's going to introduce the shark, and the camera's going to go underwater, and now we know what that means. Right? Now we know that the underwater shots of the camera POV means There's a shark attack. We're going to hear the John Williams score. And we're totally ready. And there's no shark. We see a bit of a fin. I don't think it's the fin from this thing right here. And we see a bit of a fin, really no shark. And that's very scary. After watching the scene a number of times, I see things that, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times. The water in the ocean, it changes depth quite a bit. There are scenes where a guy has a young girl on his shoulders. Clearly he's standing on the bottom of the water, of the ocean there, and then the shark is swimming through water that looks to be quite a bit deeper. So the depth there changes back and forth. That you're allowed to do that, right? You're allowed to make those sorts of changes when you're making movies and things like that. The other thing is, poor little Alex. He doesn't look like he's more than 50 pounds, and he's out in the water. But at the very end of the scene, we're going to see some blood come washing up on shore, and his mother there. And it's very sad and it's very scary, but poor little Alex, I doubt if he has that much blood that could wash up ashore all that way. Anyway, those are some of the weird things that I see from movies. You watch something 3 or 4 times every semester, you're bound to pick up on stuff like that. Okay, so wonderful scene from Jaws and Spielberg. But the main reason we're looking at the film is, so the studio knew about all of these problems that Spielberg was suffering through back east, out on the East Coast there, on the ocean. He wanted to shoot on the ocean. Everybody said, oh, just shoot in a studio tank. They've been doing movies that took place on the water, on the ocean, that way for years and years and years. You have a lot of control over shooting inside on a big studio tank. They can control the waves even and things like that, and the clouds. As we all know, shooting on the ocean is very difficult. The weather changes about every hour or so, and if you're trying to preserve some kind of continuity for a scene that takes place over a short period of time, and it's going to take you a week to shoot the scene, and you're going to try to match it all together, it's going to be very, very difficult. But Spielberg thought shooting on the ocean would be a really great way to go, and it was hard. It was a very hard shoot. He was traumatized by the shoot with the shark. He was very young, very green. Hadn't become, the all caps Spielberg yet, and he was very traumatized and very nervous during the shoot. That is, until the movie opened. So the studio knew about all this, and they decided to go for a wide release in the summer, which was unusual. Most big budget movies would be in the fall or in the spring, and they would be as a limited, also known as platform release in a few theaters in a couple of big cities, and then it would be rolled out through a couple of months. But they were nervous about the movie, and they decided, well, let's advertise the heck out of this thing, make as much money as we can, as fast as we can, and by the time word gets out that it's not a particularly good movie, then we will hopefully have mitigated our losses. And they were wrong on that point. It was, of course, a very big hit, and they took most of their lessons from the business side of the movie. It's a very good movie. And very tense, and Spielberg was a good director even on his second movie. But a lot of the reason why we're talking about Jaws, aside from introducing us to Steven Spielberg, is its business side, and the importance of opening weekend. all of that was increased even more 2 years later when George Lucas's Star Wars came out. More lessons about the business side of things, and George Lucas wasn't quite as green as Spielberg. He already had a big hit on his resume with American Graffiti, and the first movie he made was THX 1138, an expanded version of his USC student thesis film that was expanded, and Francis Coppola put his name on as a producer in order to help Lucas secure funding from the studio. He was sort of a godfather, really, back then. And so George Lucas had a big hit, and with American Graffiti, which was about his youthful days, drag racing and riding up and down the streets, and Friday night, Saturday night, just partying in small town Modesto in Central California. So with that big hit, he was able to get enough financing for Star Wars, and of course that was a big hit. It wasn't a wide release, though. It wasn't a wide release, but the lines were so long the first couple of weekends that the studio went wide very, very fast after that. Lucas very cagily kept the rights to the action figures. He sold the rights of the film, that one film, to the studio, and he got enough money from that so that he could self-finance the rest of the Star Wars movies that he wanted to make. You might remember that Star Wars, since the movie came out, is now called A New Hope, and it was Episode 4. And so Lucas wanted to kind of start right in the middle. He wasn't sure if he was going to be able to fill out his complete story. So he labeled it Episode 4. It looks a lot like a serial, and serials were shown in movie theaters in the 1930s and 40s, and usually they would be shown to kids' audiences on a Saturday matinee, and you'd see maybe 15 minutes of Flash Gordon, or even Batman or Superman movies had serials, and then it would say, and there would be a credit roll, much like the beginning of Star Wars, and then at the end there would be some problem for the protagonist, and then the credit would say, be sure to tune in, be sure to come back next week, boys and girls, for the further adventures of Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon or somebody like that. So Star Wars sort of has that at the very beginning, almost like it's a 1940s serial. And it has other elements from the 1940s. It has those wipes. Looks like sort of like a windshield wiper, something like that, that transitions from one scene to the next scene. And it really is a movie about movies. It references Westerns, it references samurai movies, and 1950s sci-fi, and that's partly why it's as popular and fun as it is because it's new, but it's familiar, right? It's new, but it's familiar, and that combination proved to be really genius on Lucas's part. So he made lots of money off of the toy rights, action figure toy rights, for the film. Most of the movie studios, all of the movie studios, they're parts of big conglomerates, Disney being the chief example, but a lot of them are parts of large conglomerates. CBS and Paramount are together, NBC and Universal are together, and so on, and Disney with like everything else. So again, importance of opening weekend, and the second weekend drop If it's 50% or more, then that's not a good thing. So if a movie opens to $100 million, drops 50%, that's 50 million. Second weekend, 25, or third weekend, 25 million. Then another 50% drop, 12 and a half, 6, 3, and so on. That's kind of the standard way that a good theatrical run would be. But if a movie opens at $100 million and then it drops to like $30 million on the second weekend, that means word is out. This is not a good movie. Tell your friends to stay away. So that is part of the business side of things. And all this that I'm going to be talking about here for a while is all part of the business of the movies. Multiples. So opening weekend as a percentage of the total theatrical run. So like I was describing before, a lot of movies make half of their total money on opening weekend. One weekend and they make half. Okay, they make $200 million on opening weekend, and then 100, and then 50, and then half. And movies that make a lot of money, like Avatar or Titanic or Avengers Endgame or something like that, they are going to have a much longer theatrical run. They're not going to do it all up front. They're not going to do it quite so much all up front like typical big blockbuster summer type movies. And those really, truly big movies, they have a longer run, and they have a different kind of a multiple, 1 to 5 or something like that, but not half from that opening weekend. Platforms, that's the term, that's the business term for ways that you put your product out there. You might hear or read, we're going to have a multi-platform release of our new such and such. Okay, so theaters is one platform, television, internet streaming, those are all platforms. Synergy, that's the big word these days. It's been a big word for a while now, but Disney for sure has really glommed on to synergy. All the different parts of the conglomerate working together, pulling together. We don't have the theme park people trying to beat the film people, right? We're better than you are, right? We're competing, we're better than you are. No, they're all together, right? We're helping you, you're helping me, we're helping you. That is the synergy way. And Disney is very good at it. Now, they're not the only one. Universal has Fast and Furious rides and things like that. Other things. Simpsons, I'm not sure why the Simpsons is at Universal, but anyway, all the others are also good at this synergy. Disney's not the only one, but they really have perfected it. Franchise, we've talked about this before, I think. I'm pretty sure. And really that means you can get sequels. And a franchise, of course, that's a business term. McDonald's has franchises, Subway has franchises, and so on, where the main company doesn't own all of the shops or restaurants or whatever. But they do all the work, and if you open up a McDonald's franchise, the money is almost guaranteed to pour in. That's the idea. The McDonald's people, they take care of the advertising and the menus and all of that in the setup. Once you own a franchise, the money comes pouring in. So, translated to the film industry, all the work has been done by that first movie, by that first Star Wars movie, by that first Harry Potter movie, and that first Fast and Furious movie, or whatever, right? You release, part 2, part 3, part 4, 5, 6, 7, all that, and people are ready to go see any more movies in that franchise. A lot of people don't like to take a chance. Even like Harry Potter was a bit of a chance. Most franchises, the first film was a big chance. Sci-fi was not a big thing in 1977 when Star Wars came out. And boy wizards, who would think about a boy wizard? And things like that. Even Iron Man or something like that. He was not a popular comic book. Nobody even had heard of Iron Man, not the way Superman and Spider-Man and so on. So the first film in most franchises is really a bit of a gamble. But once a movie is a hit, then sequel, sequel, sequel. And Hollywood loves that, and most people like that because there's no surprise, right? There's no surprise. You know what you're going to get. Back end, that's profit sharing, right? Around back, right? You share in the profits, not upfront money, but around back, profit sharing with actors and probably directors too. And a reboot is, gee, you know, whoever's playing Spider-Man is too old, or wants too much money, or who knows what. James Bond, Superman, Batman, right? They've all been rebooted. They've all been rebooted, and basically they're just kind of pretending that the other films didn't exist. And for me, I've been through a number of reboots, whether it's a James Bond or whatever, and usually it's the film that you grow up on that you love the most, the actor or whatever. For me, it's Sean Connery for James Bond because that's the guy that played James Bond when I was 17, 18, 19. And so when your favorite franchise, when there's someone else playing Iron Man or Thor or Captain America, rather than Chris Evans or Chris Hemsworth or Robert Downey Jr., it's going to be very weird. It's going to be very weird to you when I still like Chris Hemsworth. Boy, he was great. Well, then you're going to sound like an old fart just like me. Okay, you're going to be referring to the old days when things were much better. Today, 70% of Hollywood film revenue comes from overseas. Okay, about. It's not exactly, right? Some is going to be higher, some is going to be lower. Action movies for sure are going to skew heavy from overseas. Comedies, less so. Comedy doesn't translate quite as well to overseas as action does. And I don't know, I have no idea what language this is. Maybe it's Korean, I don't know, I can't tell. But I love the poster, right? There we go. 70% of Hollywood film revenue. So that's why a lot of movies maybe feature maybe Chinese characters, right? So much money is coming from China. That market in China is almost as big as the U.S., so we're probably not going to have Chinese villains anymore the way we used to back in the 60s and 70s in the James Bond movies and so on. So, when you're selling to an international audience, you got to be careful. Who are the bad guys, right? Who are the bad guys? Are they, which country, right? Are they Russians or Brazilians or whatever? Sometimes it's easier picking on something like businessmen, business people, because everybody has trouble with business people and banks, or domestic spying, privacy issues, things like that. So that's sort of an easier villain to pick rather than communist China or Russia or something like that. So as I said earlier, action movies are the easiest to market to foreign audiences. Think about it. What is an action movie? Chasing and fighting. Okay, yeah, it's kind of simple, but chasing and fighting, everybody can understand that. Slang in particular is very hard to do, and I will talk about that. We'll have a little bit more on foreign films, and we'll talk about the problems of translating slang. Studios never seem to really get the future. They fought TV back in the 50s. They fought VHS in the 70s and 80s, and they didn't really like streaming. Okay, they sold a whole bunch of their stuff to Netflix, right? But maybe we can squeeze some more money out. We'll just sell it. We'll not sell it, rent it out, lease it out to Netflix. Now, of course, they're pulling it all back in and deciding to open up their own streaming services. But the point is they're really late to the game in most instances. They get paid an awful lot of money, but sometimes they have trouble seeing the future. When home video came out with Betamax, the studio's first move was to sue Sony, okay, for copyright infringement. You are stealing our movies, and they sued Sony, makers of Betamax. Now, somebody else might have thought, gee, if people want our movies, then maybe we ought to package our movies up, record them on a nice high quality, put colorful packages and shrink wrap it and all that kind of stuff, and sell our movies or rent our movies to the public. But that wasn't their first thought. Their first thought was, let's just sue them. We're going to transition now to Steven Spielberg. We've kind of been talking about Spielberg with Jaws, but a little bit more depth on Spielberg. He began in television, as I said, and worked his way into the movies. And he has a very enviable career of mixing big budget popcorn, what they call popcorn movies. And as a side note, the reason they're called popcorn movies is action movies tend to sell more popcorn. People get all excited and they start eating fast, I guess. But movie theaters make a lot of money selling from their concession stands, Coke and soft drinks and popcorn and candy and all of that. And the way the business works, the studios get most of the box office on the opening weekend, less of the box office on the second weekend, less of the box office on the third weekend. So the way that the theaters are going to make money on especially the early weekends is by selling from their concession stands. Then if the movie is a big hit and it's in theaters for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, then the theaters make a much higher percentage of the money after that. Anyway, Spielberg, with his wonderful popcorn movies, Close Encounters, Indiana Jones, 4 of those, E.T., War of the Worlds, Jurassic Park. I think he directed 3 of those, and now he's sort of producing and getting money from that. Ready Player One, movies like that. And serious-minded, Oscar-type winning movies. So we get Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, and I have a really nice clip for you to watch. Check out the URL. It's a big part of that very famous D-Day landing scene in Normandy on the beaches. Okay, so check that out. It's really something. The people that were there, the men that were there, who are quite old now, they'd be in their 90s, but 20 years ago when the movie came out, and they were in their 70s and 80s, really said that, that's the way it was. That's it. It was horrific, and Spielberg really nailed it. So, and Spielberg got his 2 directing Oscars for those 2 films, Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. Lincoln, more awards and nominations, and Bridge of Spies, and The Color Purple, and Amistad, and so on. Okay, Bridge of Spies, lots of great Oscar-type movies. And again, that's contrasted with his big money-making type movies, right? So he's got this really wonderful, enviable career in Hollywood, right? He's got the box office and all of that, and he's got the accolades and the awards from his other movies. I understand he's working on West Side Story, which is a musical. So we'll see what he brings to that. So I want to contrast Saving Private Ryan with a couple of Vietnam War films, which is going to allow me to dive in and look at a couple more of our directors. Back to Stanley Kubrick, whom we know from 2001 and Dr. Strangelove and all sorts of wonderful stuff, and The Shining, So we're going to see a little bit of Stanley Kubrick. There he is, right there, in London, right? They brought in the palm trees. I'll talk about that in Stanley Kubrick, and also Francis Coppola. So, was it filmed? None of these movies were filmed in Vietnam. I think today we might be able to film in Vietnam. I'm not sure if we would film a Vietnam War film in Vietnam, but we're definitely business-wise, trade-wise, able to film in Vietnam these days. If you need a jungle, then Southeast Asia, some movies like Good Morning Vietnam were done in Thailand or the Philippines and things like that. Which is where Apocalypse Now was filmed. But Full Metal Jacket, interestingly, was filmed in London. There was a large factory area. I think it was a cement factory. And before they were going to tear the whole thing down and put in, I don't know, apartments or something, they got their use of it. They knocked some walls in to create the rubble that you might get from war. Brought in some palm trees. And put some signs up in Vietnamese and in French. Vietnam was a French colony for many years, and so they did Full Metal Jacket based on a book in London. And I've got a couple of great scenes for you. The opening scene with Gunnery Sergeant Hartman in boot camp is wonderful. Although it turns rather horrific toward the end, and then some early scenes in Vietnam, sort of darkly humored. It's not really a comedy, but the humor is a kind of dark humor that you might get in wartime. So make sure you check out those scenes on YouTube from Full Metal Jacket. At one point, he's going to refer to one of the characters as Pyle, and there's Gomer Pyle, United States Marine Corps. It was a comedy on TV in the 1960s, and the guy was just a real doofus. So that's who he's referring to. Okay, Pyle, Private Pyle. He gives nicknames to all his recruits in boot camp. And after that, we have Apocalypse Now from 1979. It is a very expressionistic film. It's not particularly realistic. I don't think there's any record of people surfing during battle, but we're going to see that here in the film. Playing music out of the helicopters. Again, I've been in helicopters when I worked at a medical center doing video, ridden around in helicopters, and it's really loud. I don't know how big of a speaker you'd need hanging out from the side of your helicopter for people to be able to hear the music, but it seems rather unlikely to me. But in the movie, yeah, we're gonna hear music being blasted. The Ride of the Valkyries, very cool piece of music. The Norse gods riding off into battle. Okay, and so it's a wonderful piece of music. That's the name of it. If you want to know, you'll probably recognize it. It's used a lot. Francis Coppola as the director of this film, coming off of Godfather and Godfather Part 2. Okay, so he didn't win the Best Director for Godfather, but he got the directing for Godfather Part 2. He also had The Conversation, which was nominated for Best Picture that same year, and Apocalypse Now. So 4 Best Picture, Best Director nominations in like a 7-year period. So it's a pretty good streak for Mr. Coppola. And Martin Sheen, as seen right there. Also Marlon Brando, whom we know from The Godfather for sure, and even going all the way back to On the Waterfront and Streetcar Named Desire. Robert Duvall also from The Godfather, and many other fantastic movies. Oh, he was in MASH too. We saw him in MASH too. So Robert Duvall, some great scenes of the attack. Classic lines. I love the smell of napalm in the morning, says one of the generals, or colonels. Colonel Kilgore, I think it is. Colonel Kilgore. I can't remember all the names. Colonel Kilgore, the Martin Duvall character, or the Robert Duvall character. Wonderful film. So enjoy, right? I've got a couple of scenes lined up for you, but there are plenty more that you can find on your own if you dig around just a little bit. So Vietnam War films were famously done after the war. The actual war for us was somewhere around 1965 when President Johnson started ramping up the army there. We were over there as advisors and whatnot from a little bit earlier than that, but really coming in and hundreds of thousands of troops by the late 60s until we pulled out in 73. And look at the films, right? Years later, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, 10 years later, and I think in times of a trauma like this, that a little bit of distance is a really good thing. We're still making movies about World War II, all these 70, 80 years later with Saving Private Ryan and stuff like that. Vietnam, I'm not sure how many more Vietnam films we're going to have. It was a pretty big thing there for a while. Some really good movies, award-winning movies. Best Picture winners like Platoon. But it's hard to say. World War II was, it's hard, I know it's funny to say a perfect war, but the villains were so villainous. In Vietnam, a lot of people, you could see it as a call for independence, right? We want to be independent from the U.S. and we don't want to be split into North and South, and so you could sort of see how that's not all that bad, really. And World War I was kind of like that, and other wars are like that. But boy, in World War II, with Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust and all that, it's just such a perfect villain. So I would say that we're going to be seeing World War II movies for a long time, right? It was you just don't get a better war, and knowing that it turned out and we won and all of that. But some really good Vietnam War films, and there might still be a few more, but I would say that there's probably going to be more World War II movies, and we'll see what happens in the Middle East. There have been a couple. Hurt Locker won Best Picture, and a number of others, but we're still losing people over there in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. So it's not like we can look back on the Middle East very much yet. Kuwait and all that. It's not like we can look back with a lot of distance. We don't really have that perspective, that distance that we have from Vietnam or from World War II. The other thing that we get from this era, and not the Vietnam War era, but from Apocalypse Now and Star Wars in particular, is the new emphasis on sound design in the movies. And George Lucas's THX sound system was developed. He wasn't satisfied with the kind of sound that most movie theaters were able to produce in the middle 1970s. Sure, some big theaters like the Chinese Theater or the Cinerama Dome had a nice sound system, but there were too many movie theaters around the country that didn't have really very good sound or sound systems or anything like that. So he and his team worked together on this wonderful sound system, and they could make films using the system. And then sometimes some of the directors like Lucas and even Stanley Kubrick and people like that would supervise where their movies were shown, and how to do the sound right and the balance and all that. And here we see mixing of the sound for the helicopters coming ashore in Apocalypse Now. I think that's Ben Burt. I'm not sure exactly, but I know he's a sound guy, and that is a big part of the movies and going forward, right? The sound design today with all the wonderful sound design that they can do. A lot of it is the CGI and all of the visual effects that we see in the movies, but a lot has happened with sound too. The sound and